Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God, back with you with the next video in my series reading Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Oliver Twist as read by Lord Naren White. I had no hold upon him to make him worse, pursued the Jew, anxiously watching the countenance of his companion. His hand was not in. I had nothing to frighten him with, which we always must have in the beginning, or we labor in vain. What could I do? Send him out with the Dodger and Charlie? We had enough of that at first, my dear. I trembled for us all. That was not my doing, observed Monks. No, no, my dear, renewed the Jew, and I don't quarrel with it now. Because if it had never happened, you might never have clapped eyes on the boy to notice him, and so led to the discovery that it was him you were looking for. Well, I got him back for you by the means of the girl, and then she begins to favor him. Throttle the girl, said Monks impatiently. Why, we can't afford to do that just now, my dear, replied the Jew, smiling. And besides, that sort of thing is not in our way, or one of these days, I might be glad to have it done. I know what these girls are, Monks. Well, as soon as the boy begins to harden, she'll care no more for him than for a block of wood. You want him made a thief. If he is alive, I can make him one from this time. And if, said the Jew, drawing nearer to the other, it's not likely, mind, but if the worst comes to the worst and he is dead. It's no fault of mine he is, interposed the other man, with a look of terror, and clasping the Jew's arm with trembling hands. Mind that, Fagin. I had no doubt, I had no hand in it. Anything but his death. I told you from the first. I won't shed blood. It's always found out, and haunts a man besides. If they shot him dead, I was not the cause. Do you hear me? Fire this infernal den. What's that? What? Cried the Jew, grasping the coward round the body with both arms as he sprung to his feet. Where? Yonder, replied the man, glaring at the opposite wall. The shadow. I saw the shadow of a woman in a cloak and bonnet pass along the wainscot like a breath. The Jew released his hold and rushed tumultuously from the room. The candle, wasted by the draught, was standing where it had been placed. It showed them only the empty staircase and their own white faces. They listened intently. A profound silence reigned throughout the house. It's your fancy, said the Jew, taking up the light and turning to his companion. I'll swear I saw it, replied Monks, trembling. It was bending forward when I saw it first, and when I spoke it darted away. The Jew glanced contemptuously at the pale face of his associate, and telling him he could follow, if he pleased, ascended the stairs. They looked into all the rooms. They were cold, bare, and empty. They descended into the passage, and thence into the cellars below. The green damp hung upon the low walls. The track of the snail and slug glistened in the light of the candle, but all was still as death. What do you think now? Said the Jew, when they had regained the passage. Besides ourselves, there is not a creature in the house except Toby and the boys, and they're safe enough. See here? As a proof of the fact, the Jew drew forth 2 eyes from his pocket and explained that when he first went downstairs, he had locked them in, to prevent any intrusion of the conference. This accumulated testimony effectually staggered Mr. Monks. His protestations had gradually become less and less vehement as they proceeded in their search without making any discovery, and now he gave vent to several very grim laughs, and confessed it could only have been his excited imagination. He declined any renewal of the conversation, however, for that night, suddenly remembering that it was past 1 o'clock, and so the amiable couple parted. Chapter 27 Atones for the unpoliteness of a former chapter, which deserted a lady most unceremoniously. As it would be by no means seemly in a humble author to keep so mighty a personage as a beadle waiting, with his back to the fire, and the skirts of his coat gathered up under his arms, until such time as it might suit his pleasure to relieve him, and as it would still less become the station, or his gallantry to involve in the same neglect a lady, on whom that beadle had looked with an eye of tenderness and affection, and in whose ear he had whispered sweet words, which, coming from such a quarter, might well thrill the bosom of maid or matron, of whatsoever degree. The historian whose pen traces these words, trusting that he knows his place, and that he entertains becoming reverence for those upon earth to whom high and important authority is delegated, hastens to pay them that respect which their position demands, and to treat them with all that duteous ceremony which their exalted rank and by consequence great virtues imperatively claim at his hands. Towards this end, indeed, he had purposed to introduce in this place a dissertation touching the divine right of beadles, and elucidative of the position that a beadle can do no wrong, which could not fail to have been both pleasurable and profitable to the right-minded reader, but which he is unfortunately compelled by want of time and space to postpone some more convenient and fitting opportunity, on the arrival of which he will be prepared to show that a beadle properly constituted, that is to say, a parochial beadle, attached to a parochial workhouse, and attending in his official capacity, the parochial church, is, in right and virtue of his office, possessed of all the excellencies and best qualities of humanity, and that none of those excellencies can mere company's beadles, or court of law beadles, or even chapel of ease beadles, save the last, and they in a very lowly and inferior degree lay the remotest sustainable claim. Mr. Bumble had recounted the teaspoons, reweighed the sugar tones, made a closer inspection of the milk pot, and ascertained to nicety the exact condition of the furniture, down to the very horse-air seats of the chairs, and had repeated each process full half a dozen times, before he began to think that it was time for Mrs. Corney to return. Thinking begets thinking, as there were no sounds of Mrs. Corney's approach. It occurred to Mr. Bumble that it would be an innocent and virtuous way of spending the time, if he were further to allay his curiosity by a cursory glance at the interior of Mr. Corney's chest of drawers. Having listened at the keyhole to assure himself that nobody was approaching the chamber, Mr. Bumble, beginning at the bottom, proceeded to make himself acquainted with the contents of the 3 long drawers, which, being filled by various garments of good fashion and texture, carefully preserved between 2 layers of old newspapers speckled with dried lavender, seemed to yield him exceeding satisfaction. Arriving in a course of time at the right-hand corner drawer in which was the key, and beholding therein a small padlocked box, which being shaken gave forth a present sound as of the chinking of a coin, Mr. Bumble returned with a stately walk to the fireplace, and resuming his old attitude, said with a grave and determined air, "I'll do it." He followed up this remarkable declaration by shaking his head in a waggish manner for 10 minutes, as though he were remonstrating with himself for being such a pleasant dog, and then he took a view of his legs and profile, which much seeming pleasure and earnest interest. He was still placidly engaged in this latter survey, when Mrs. Corney, hurrying into the room, threw herself, in a breathless state, on a chair by the fireside, and covering her eyes with one hand, placed the other over her heart, and gasped for breath. "Mrs. Corney," said Mr. Bumble, stooping over the matron, "what is this, ma'am? Has anything happened, ma'am? Pray, answer me." "I'm on," Mr. Bumble, in his alarm, could not immediately think of the word tenterhooks, so he said, "Broken bottles." "Oh, Mr. Bumble," cried the lady, "I have been so dreadfully put out." and we'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care and thanks again.